All right, well, thank you for coming to this presentation. Welcome to this convoluted topic. I was thinking probably on using something better, but I couldn't come up with anything shorter. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of the different differences and techniques. So I know that a lot of you guys are very familiar with these terms, so I will try to do my best to not make it very to dive a lot in these on the basics. So I'm going to start a little bit talking about me. So I am a technical architect at Pixel. I've been doing Drupal for a few years now, since 2012. I started when Drupal 7 was starting, so I got to do a little bit of Drupal 6 back in the day. Most of those years doing Drupal 7, obviously, and now I've made a switch to Drupal 8 and a little bit of front end. So that's why I added there PHP and JavaScript, because as many of you, I was mostly a backend developer, so I was doing more like server configuration, developing modules, writing RESTful services, everything on the back end. But there was this point when I started seeing all this decoupling and all this fuss about front-end JavaScript frameworks, and I was like, okay, I should probably take a look at it, and that's what I did. So how did I end up here doing this? Who am I to talk about anything about this? So I have a major in computer science and cybernetics, so I also did a little bit of electronics at school as well. I started working for a research and development company, mostly doing web stuff with Python and natural language toolkit, a little bit of like AI. This is a few years ago too. Obviously Django and C for embedded systems. Then I moved to IBM and I started working for an operating system there, so it was a lot of like very low level programming languages, like a little bit of assembly, C++, C, and it was for one of the proprietary OSs that IBM still has and uses. Then I made a switch to doing like more serious web development with Drupal. As I mentioned before, I started doing Drupal 7. I really liked the development world a lot, so I started getting more and more into it. I was able to contribute a couple of things for Drupal 7 as well. And now I work for Pixel. Like I said before, I mostly do work with Drupal 8. And I help architecting also decoupled solutions that we've used successfully for clients. We've made a decision as a team in Pixel that after exploring a little bit of Angular and Vue.js and React, that React was the way in which we wanted to go as a company. So I started learning a little bit about React and JavaScript frameworks. So for today's adventure, I'm going to be revisioning a few of the differences and advantages and disadvantages of each approach that I think that we can do these days for a Drupal 8 based architecture, which is a traditional one, which is the one that we do, the one that Drupal does very well out of the box. It's also called like fully coupled or the monolithic approach. Then we have a decoupled approach, which is going completely headless. So Drupal will be only our backend with no theming layer, nothing to render on the front end. So that's what headless is called. It's become a very popular term in the last couple of years. And there is a third architecture that it's also very useful for some cases, which is a progressively decoupled approach or a hybrid approach. So I'm going to be talking about a few of the differences and challenges in each of these, and let's get to it. So as you know, traditional CMS is a piece of technology that will provide us with everything that we need. So we have our content capabilities, we have a very solid editor experience as well. We have things like WYSIWYG, which make content entering very easy and very straightforward for people who is not very technical. And it has everything, so it can handle like assets as well, like images that Drupal does very well. And it's usually what we need for it is just people that are experienced with that specific CMS or technology. Then for our decouple approach, as I was saying before, is using something only for the backend. So no theming layer, nothing at all. The only thing that these decouple approaches would give us is most of the times only an API to interact with. One of the main benefits of this approach is that when you have a project that requires to deliver content to different outlets, that could be like mobile applications, web applications that are not necessarily within Drupal or a CMS, or even wearables and any kind of stuff, even signs that we can just be consuming information from. This is a very good approach to tackle some of those problems. And then lastly, the progressively decouple approach, which means that we can benefit from all of the architectures and technologies out of the box that a CMS would give us, but we can inject in certain points very rich experiences within the same site. So this means that we can enhance our user experience without having to remove entirely what we have like out of the box, or with the stuff that we already know. If we've been doing this for a long time, we can inject in a few places these applications, and most of the times it looks like something else, something completely different than what we can do within the CMS. So this is always a question that happens when we are thinking about this, is what do you want to decouple? So one reason is obviously provide content for different outlets. The other one is security, right? Because since we are not coupled into our CMS, we have a completely separate application that does not expose our database, for example, or anything. We choose exactly what we want to expose, and that gives and adds a lot of security in terms of our backend application. There's also separation of concerns. So if we have teams that are very good at backend and teams that are very good at frontend, they can pretty much work in parallel. So the frontend developers don't need to wait for the backend developers to have an API. They can mock APIs and at least start developing something that would end up being used as the frontend. As I said, provide rich experiences. With Drupal and only Drupal, is very hard to provide something that feels very dynamic and very fast. And these days, the web is all about experiences and having everything fast. And when I click something, I want to see something right away. People and we as users don't want to wait for a response from a web server to get a result for something. So this is also a very good reason why you might want to decouple. And last one, well, all the cool kids are doing it, right? So if you go to any of these conferences, even this conference has a lot of decouple, progressively decouple, even showcases, which are very good and are very well executed. But it's not always the best option. You kind of need to assess exactly what your audience is and what is the purpose of your specific project or application. So what are some of the Drupal 8 specific pros that we have? So Drupal 8 is ready, so we can just install it, and if we don't care about our theming or our experience or our users, we can just have it there and it will have some functionality. So it is ready. So this is stable. I think this is true now, since a couple of years ago I wouldn't probably put that bullet there with Drupal 8. But now I think it's stable enough for being used in production and large enterprise sites. It is well supported now. Also, the Drupal community have been making a lot of effort in porting all those modules that were specific for Drupal 7. We've seen in the last couple of years a lot of that work and effort being put into making everything also Drupal 8 compatible. And if it's not possible, like is the case for organic groups, which was a very complex module for Drupal 7, there are new alternatives that we can use that would give us similar features or similar functionality right there. So Drupal 8 has a very solid data model. So I don't know if you've taken a look at any of the other major open source CMSs. Their data models are not very good and are not very extensible as Drupal is. So the architecture that went into having content types, taxonomies, even fields, and all that is very well. Even when you see it on the database, it's also very well structured, even though it can grow out of control. But the thought process or the thought put into it is very, very solid. So that's why one of the main reasons why Drupal 8 is so popular, even with decoupled architectures. So if you're doing a Drupal 8 project, what you need is an experienced Drupal team, right? So you need a team of people who know how to do Drupal, the backend of Drupal, and the frontend, the theming layer, and that's all you need pretty much. So maybe a little bit of DevOps as well for the deployments, but you can, if you have people who know Drupal, they will be able to overcome the challenges with Drupal itself. Another thing that Drupal has is a very aggressive caching layer, which is something that is most of the times very good when we have very static and almost like brochure sites, because our information gets delivered very quickly. This also has a lot to do with reverse proxy caching servers as well. So everything is very well synced, and the caching layer, even though it's complex for Drupal 8, is very good when it's well executed. And obviously it's Drupal, so it's well known. The name is well known out there for clients and for people. They see it as a reliable solution. Now, what are a few of the Drupal 8 cons, right? So it is a monolithic, complex architecture, so people who know Drupal very well are very rare. Does not feel very dynamic. So Drupal follows these HTTP response server model when we have to wait for the request. When we make a request, we need to wait for the response coming from the server, and then the browser re-renders the page. So I was saying it's very hard to implement complex and feature-rich interfaces. Drupal 8 ships with jQuery, so we can do some of it with jQuery, but it's not like the standard these days. So everybody's moving away from jQuery and trying to use better technologies to render dynamic content. You have to do the presentation layer the Drupal way. So there's a lot of people who don't like it. I personally believe it is complex. So if you're moving from 7 to 8, you need to learn Twig. You need to learn how the Twig templates work, how to debug them. There is a lot of functionality that is entangled with the backend as well. So it's not very easy I'm just gonna use this for this. So we're talking about fully coupled Drupal 8 architecture. Is very hard to not do it the Drupal way. It's almost impossible. So this is something that we have to do. It's obviously jQuery based and it's Drupal. So for better or worse, being Drupal is both, I think, a pro and a con. So for JavaScript frameworks, what are some of the pros that we have? So they're very, very flexible. They allow you as the developer to create complex and rich experiences. JavaScript frameworks are widely used outside of Drupal as well, and very well maintained as well. And as I was saying, most of them interfaces very well with Drupal 8 now, because Drupal 8 now ships with API capabilities almost out of the box. You just need to enable the module. But just enabling the REST module for Drupal 8 will give you a way to interact with. Drupal 8 is not the best, so there's been a lot of solutions lately. I remember a year ago, people were using Waterwheel. Now it looks like we're moving towards more a GraphQL approach, which I'm going to talk a little bit about it later. But there is a lot of ways in which you can interact with Drupal 8 now. So what if we're deciding to go this route? So what are the cons about using JavaScript framework? So choosing the right framework can be confusing. There are a lot of choices. Not only the biggest ones that I mentioned, like React, Angular, and Vue. Those are the 3 biggest ones, but there are a lot of them. So some of them are better suited for some problems, and so it's very hard to choose. There's lots of options. So what you end up doing is just trying a little bit of everything and try to decide which one is the best for the particular project that you're working on, or which one has the best features that you would want to learn. And so it is complex. Also, writing good JavaScript is hard, especially if you're coming from a background like myself, doing very low-level programming languages and then object-oriented. Even if you're strong on object-oriented, JavaScript is hard. It doesn't follow necessarily object-oriented paradigm, so it is hard to do it well. Then if we will need a JavaScript experience if we want to take on this on a decouple approach, and preferably if to get people who already know the framework, because frameworks are also big and complex and they have a lot of stuff and they all work very differently from each other. And the other thing is JavaScript technologies move quickly. So whatever is I'm pretty sure you've heard this before, but whatever is people are using these days probably won't be next week. That's how fast the JavaScript scene moves. It's very fast. So on top of that, if we are already deciding that we want to decouple, so what are the challenges, like the main challenges that I've seen? So that it requires a team that is experienced in both. So both in Drupal, at least the backend capabilities of Drupal, and in JavaScript. There is also a greater architecture and deployment complexity in going decouple. Authentication can also be very challenging. We need to decide what kind of authentication we want to use depending on the project. Most of the times will be something like OAuth 2, but even getting your head wrapped around those concepts can be challenging. And obviously executing it's not as straightforward as people or as you would think when you are starting doing this. Images can be challenging as well, specifically with images that you need the auto-scaling that Drupal does for you. So Drupal will create different styles of images for you, and it will decide which one does it need to load depending on the display for each page. So you don't have any of that anymore. So if you want to do something like that, you need to do it yourself. And there are a couple of technologies that you can use for this, but it's still not out there, so it's not a product. You kind of have to write it yourself. There's also caching concerns that you need to be aware of. Course configuration, since we are executing JavaScript code most likely from another server than our backend is, so we need to configure cores for that to work correctly. And it is always challenging, and I've seen this problem happen in different solutions. It always comes, and you always have to configure, and it's also very depending on your hosting provider, your Drupal configuration, the headers that you're sending, the headers that you're receiving. So it is a complex problem. Then there is another very important challenge. So we need to decide if we are rendering the entire HTML through the application, so let the browser do all the rendering and leave all that work for the browser, or if we choose a server-side rendering technology, like could be Next.js, which is more suited for React, and there are several of these. So basically what this does is that the server will provide all the static HTML, and we will only let the browser render the HTML that needs for the dynamic part. So this is very important, and probably doesn't apply for all the cases. If we are doing a single page application, then we kind of don't need to worry too much about server-side rendering. But if it's a full site, then we do have to do that, because that also impacts on SEO and accessibility, and it's harder to write those templates for a fully decoupled application than it is for Drupal, or if we use a template for a server-side rendering technology. The last one is also a very huge one, specifically if our needs or our editors are very reliant on the preview features for Drupal 8, so there will be no more previews for our decoupled architecture, because we render something entirely different with another technology. So I've seen a couple of ways of solving this. So I saw a project not long ago where they implemented something specifically for the technology that they were using, and they just render like a link on the edit node page, for example, and they had a link there that they could click after they saved the node to see if it would look okay, and then they could publish it or do the entire workflow operations. But it is something to consider. This is not always the case. Some other cases might not need to rely on the preview capabilities very heavily. So, but it's something to consider, of course. So after you've seen all this, and then you're told to yourself, okay, now I want to go decoupling. So let's decouple. So what do we need to do now? So where do I start, right? So what did I do to be able to do something like this? So the first thing was JavaScript, right? So for me, it was learning how to write good JavaScript, catching up with ES6, ES7, and ES8. Obviously, getting at least very decent at functional programming. So it's a completely different paradigm than object-oriented or whatever that Drupal 8 uses, or even procedural programming that Drupal 7 uses. So it is hard at first to wrap your head around these concepts, because they're very different, and it works very, very different. So next in line is Webpack. So now pretty much everybody that is doing like professional JavaScript at a large scale, they are using Webpack in some sort of manner. So it is complex. Webpack, it is a complex project. It is very big. It's hard to customize, which is something that you would end up doing for your projects if you want to do a hybrid approach. It's something that we've done. It's not easy. It's not pretty. It's very confusing, and there's a lot of support also. So it's not that bad, but it's very complex. So it does a lot of things. And obviously, next point is obviously get good at the framework that you choose to do your project. So in our case, we did like a little bit of research for different ones, and then we chose React, and then it was time for us to start doing React and learning React very well. So understanding the full life cycle of the components, how do they interact with them, how does the props work, how does the state work, how does Redux work also. So these are concepts that are very different than what we would know if we were just doing Drupal. But it's something that we need to know, or somebody that is going to be working on the decouple approach needs to know to be effective and efficient, and to have something that is production ready. And then the last one, which is Node.js. Sometimes there is maybe a few cases where you can escape Node.js configuration, but so Node.js is basically the web server that uses JavaScript, and it's very different from Nginx. So I would say that Node.js does or can do pretty much everything that Nginx does, but it is more complex and it can do more. so it is. There's also, or I at least had a misconception that Node.js was slower, could be slower than Nginx, but it is not necessarily true. I think that and Node.js applications are very fast. At the end of the day, they run C code behind the scenes. So Node.js is a good technology, but it's also complex to understand the way in which they handle middleware, assets, and redirects. So all that is very different than what we used to do with Nginx or even Apache if you were using Apache before for Drupal. So another thing that we need to learn, if we haven't learned it already, is all the data is around REST APIs and GraphQL. So what this is basically the way in which we are going to communicate with our backend. So I would say that if it is something very simple, you can use the REST API module and even the JSON API module that Drupal provides. However, I don't think it scales very well. I think that for that you are way better if you start using and learning GraphQL, which is something that is way more standard across the board. It's kind of like a contract between the backend and the front end. Even though an API could be, it kind of never is in practice. There's always like changes that we need to do. And if you use GraphQL, you have a little bit more of flexibility in terms of the backend and front end teams, because the front end team can just query the stuff that they want if we're exposing all of our entities through GraphQL. So yeah, try to, if you can, if you're thinking of decoupling, try to do GraphQL so it will scale, your project will scale well. So this is an example of a decouple infrastructure. I took this from Amacy.io. So Amacy, they do provide an open source containerized architecture for doing kind of like decouple approach. So if you go to their GitHub page, their container configuration is open source and you can take a look at it. But this is just to give you an idea of how complex it can get when you have everything containerized, when you have your load balancers, different services for everything, and then you add like the part on the right is kind of like the decoupled architecture. So obviously this is like a real example for a production environment for a very high traffic Drupal decouple application. So you might not need this if you're starting or learning, but this is how it should look like when you go fully decouple. An architecture like this is what you need to do in order to provide your users with stability and with just guaranteeing that your site won't be down and it can scale well with the amount of hits that it will get. So what are a few of the techniques that we can use to do a fully decoupled approach? So it's either we go the SPI route. If we just create like a single page application, that's something that we can do. We can also do server-side rendering with Next.js specifically for React. We can also use static site generators like Gatsby. It has its own sets of challenges if we go this route, but it's also a popular approach. And Gatsby does have a connector for Drupal 8, which will allow you to create a fully static site based on your nodes from Drupal. So they are making like those integrations not only with Drupal but with other CMSs. So it is a technology that might be good for a few projects. And then we have the Drupal distributions that are already made for fully headless approaches like Contenta CMS and Reservoir. Both, I think they're slightly different in their approaches, but both are very good in terms of just having a very base setup for a decoupled architecture. So if you want to learn a little bit, and I think Contenta even has examples for the front-end clients on their GitHub page, so you can go in there and take a look at how are they doing like the communication, the connection. So content type specifically is very good to learn how to do an architecture like this. So, but is there another way to do this? So is it either fully decouple or not decouple at all? So I was thinking that there must be a way to have a little bit of both. So there's some instances where you might not want to go full decouple because it takes a lot of effort to decouple everything. But if you need a piece of functionality that is very rich and that provides a lot of interactivity, maybe we can do a hybrid approach, right? So we can do a little bit of both and have something that our clients would be very happy with. So kind of what we've seen at this point are these three. This is obviously a simplified diagram, not like the one that I showed you, but this is kind of like the conceptual things, right? So traditional, the backend and the presentation layer together. Decouple, we obviously have our CMS headless and we have our presentation layer and some JavaScript technology somewhere there. Obviously in between we would have GraphQL or an API service to communicate between those two. And then we have the hybrid diagram, which is we're using the backend and our presentation layer. They are coupled, but we inject JavaScript applications where we need to inject them. So here are a little bit of the features that we would get if we go hybrid. So we are letting Drupal render all the static content. We take advantage of the accessibility features that Drupal gives us. The SEO and the rendering of the static HTML, Drupal will take care of that. So we only provide the users with experiences when they need it, not the entire application. We will have everything within the same application. So there are a couple of challenges when deploying this and when doing this architecture. I'm going to show you exactly what in a little bit. And you can even do this to any existing or future Drupal site. So that means Drupal 7, 6, and 5 or Cold Fusion. But please use caution when doing it. I know that it sounds very good. So, I don't have to migrate all my old infrastructure or architecture to do something very cool and very engaging for my users. But just have in mind that Drupal 7 might go out of support soon. So since we are still like coupled in some ways, a lot of those security features will have an impact on our sites. So only do it knowing that what you're doing. My recommendation would be to migrate everything to a better architecture and take that as an opportunity to revisit your data, the content model that you have, and whatever you want to expose, and then do it on top of that. So it's just, you can do it, but use it with caution. So how do we do this for hybrid? So there are several ways in which we can do this. So we can write our own custom tweak template where we render a div with an ID and we inject our application there. So that's one technique that I've seen used. We can write our own custom block plugin where we will be doing pretty much the same, rendering a div or a region with certain ID where we would inject our application. There is a module for Drupal 8 which is called progressively decoupled blocks that we can use. I think this approach is good for some scenarios, but for very simple stuff it's kind of like overkill because it does a lot of stuff. There is a Webpack module which was just released last week. I haven't had a chance to personally test and try, but I saw a quick demo of it and looks very promising. So that's another good way to probably go progressively decouple. Obviously, we will need some sort of communicating with our backend because even though it's in the same application, the JavaScript application has no idea what Drupal has. So we still need to communicate with it. So the JSON API module is a good module for this. We can write our own JSON controller on Drupal and expose whatever we want as a JSON response and consume that. And There is also a possibility to expose a view as a JSON. I have this with a question mark, because even if that is possible, views are known for being very slow. Because I don't know if any of you had a chance to take a look at how many queries does a regularly heavy view makes to the MySQL database. It's insane. They make tons and tons of queries, and that makes them slow. That's why Drupal tries to cache everything, and some of the views included. But that's why that's something that you could do it too, if that's the way you can. But I don't personally recommend doing that. I think it would be better if you use the entity manager and just make your queries and expose wherever you need. That would be probably way more efficient. So it's demo time. So I prepared a small demo where I'm going to showcase the 3 approaches and how they look and how they feel different. So I'm just going to pray it doesn't fail, but let's see. So this is an out-of-the-box Drupal 8 site that I installed. I thought that a good example to showcase this was creating a multi-step form because Drupal will need to send that and wait for the return for the next step. And I thought that would be like a good example to showcase the differences. So I thought, well, what can I do that is like a multi-step form? So I thought, oh, well, yeah, what Adventure Time character are you? So those kind of like tests that you take on the internet that everybody loves, I'm sure. So this is how it looks like on a fully coupled Drupal site, right? So I have this. I hit next. I get the next thing. Well, I'm going to choose blue. Next, I have to wait a little bit for it to return. I get this, can choose this. Let me choose something that will give me somebody. And then, so right now it's fast because it's cached, but if I clear the cache, you're gonna see the, well, let me just do this to see. So as you can see, it's fast because it's a small form. So if you still need to wait for it to reload the entire page. It doesn't look like it because it's kind of fast, but you still have to wait for it, and you can still see how it reloads everything. So just imagine that you have a very big multi-step form that would take some time to re-render and to get back to you. And obviously I didn't do a lot of like styling for this. I know that you can do a lot also with CSS to make it look better, but this is kind of like out of the box. So how I set this up is that every time that somebody matches a character, I'm saving that to the state API of Drupal. So I'm just assigning a variable on the state API and incrementing it. So this is a controller that I wrote that tells you, let me just make this here so you can see. So this is a custom controller that exposes these 3 variables from the state API, and I just wrapped it in an array. And I had this structure because it's in a structure that I knew that I was going to use for the React application. So this is what Drupal is storing. So I'm gonna add one more here so you can see that is working. So if I add, so see here is clearer how we have to reload the entire page to get to the next step. So it tells you, okay, well, you're feeding the human, then it was 24. If I refresh, it is 25. So it is actually saving on the state API what I'm saving there. So the only reason why I did that is because I wanted to have something for Drupal to expose and for the decouple application or fully decouple application to consume from there. So let me go a little bit. So I have here how would a progressively decoupled approach look like within Drupal. So as you see, I'm now in full control of this little area here. I did this with a custom block where I'm just rendering an ID for the div and I'm injecting my React application into this div. So I have full control of the entire HTML and everything that happens in here. So let's see how different they are, how similar they are. So I have kind of like the same fields, but if you see, like, it's immediate. I don't have to obviously reload the page because everything is happening within the application. So it's very fast, right? So since I'm in control of everything, I can just load whatever I want. I can even load graphs. This chart is automatically polling from my state API. So just so that you can see quickly here, if I go to Postman and I make a post request to that to the controller that I wrote, let me just send this so you can see how. So if I send this, you're gonna see how the blue chart increments. So I'm polling like every, I think it's 5 seconds when I had it. So anything that talks to my endpoint, even progressively decoupled, fully decoupled, or within Drupal, if you have something that is polling that API, in this case, the state API that I wrote, is just gonna automatically update. So this is kind of like the power that you have when you are writing JavaScript applications. Yes?
You're saying state API?
Yes.
What is the state API?
The state API in Drupal 8 is what it was previously known as the variable API for Drupal 7. So it is basically, so the only catch there is that it does not persist from system to system. So if you have a set of variables on your staging environment, for example, that won't translate or won't be preserved to your production or test environment. So that's the only catch that Drupal uses it for, like, temporary storage of things. So that's what it is. So basically, if we have time, I'll put up the code there. It's very easy just to use it. You can show you.
It's easier to use that instead of having to use like the entity API or something.
Yeah, exactly. So my only reasoning behind this is because I needed something very simple, so I don't want to create like an entity and expose it, and so I just put something in there. But I'll show you how it's very easy. So these are the two, the first two approaches, right? Like a fully coupled, a progressively decoupled, and then I took another example in doing like a fully decoupled approach. And what I chose for this was Gatsby. So I created a new Gatsby site where I am injecting this very same application, but that site is completely decoupled for Drupal. So I use one of the starter themes that Gatsby has. So this is how, like, a completely different page, right, that I'm gonna interact with Drupal. So you have all the freedom you want if you're fully decoupled. So this is why this one looks very, very different. But at the end of the day, I am able to use the exact same React application that I wrote. So let's see, and it works. This is obviously sending the data to Drupal, so we can. The only thing I was not able to do here because of Gatsby was the chart, because the chart has a dependency on the file system library for JavaScript, and Gatsby does not let you use that on their Webpack configuration. So I was not able to include the charts in here because of that Gatsby Webpack thing, but everything else works the same. We can see if, let me go back to the decouple one, just to load the chart. So if you see right now, the count is 18, but if I go again for Princess Bubblegum, where was it? So see, it grew to 19. So the three of my applications, the fully coupled, progressively decoupled, and the fully decoupled, are talking to the exact same endpoint, and we can query the exact same endpoint on the three, and we can use that to display all the information, and we have like full control of what's happening on this application. So kind of what I wanted to show you, this is a very basic example on how all of them differ and the pros and cons. I know that I don't have all the time here to show you everything, but this is kind of how they look and they behave, and they look like. Yes?
So did you write a REST plugin that's got the post method defined in it? And
Yep.
you're using that post method as interacting with the state API? Is that what you're doing?
Yes.
You're saying they're interacting with the same endpoint. So you use
Exactly.
REST plugin, define the post method.
Not even the REST plugin. I wrote Symfony JSON controllers.
Okay.
So it's not even using, I'm not even...
You're not even using the web services that Drupal.
No, not for this example.
But you could do it.
Yes, that's the way in which you would do it if you have like a full content structure and you have all your content types. That's the way you have to do it. I just did it like this because it was like very fast and very simple,
Okay.
so I didn't do it. But yeah, that's right.
So I have a quick question.
Uh-huh.
You said you have to use the REST API if you want to utilize the content types or...
You don't have to, because you could write your own controllers as well and interact with the entities and expose them. But I guess that if you want to be, if you want to have like a standard in your API, because Drupal will give you that without you having to write any of it. So it's very easy to configure it, and you can even set, I think, even permissions on some of the endpoints and all that. So Drupal will give you all of that. You don't have to. Of course, you can write your own custom controllers as I do, but those controls will be very big, I think, because you will need to interact with a lot of entities depending on how many content types you have, and you will have to create your entire API tree of endpoints and all that. So it's not that easy, and Drupal already has all that for you, so you don't have to. Mm-hmm. Well, that was all that I had. Well, thank you very much for coming to my session, and I guess we have a 5 minutes for questions if anyone has questions, extra questions. Yes?
So two things, when I look at decoupled, the things that bother me sometimes, you talked about it being better for security, but I think all you've done is shift security, because as you said, if you just start writing custom JSON endpoints, you have no security, and making those secure is kind of a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing you talked about is the changing JavaScript frameworks, and isn't this shifting so that now you're writing a lot of custom code in the front end that now you have to maintain, and then 6 months from now when there's a new version of React, you end up having to rewrite your React component versus doing a Drupal upgrade? Like, you haven't really saved anything, you just kind of shifted the work around.
Yes and no. Well, with the security, you're right. You're kind of shifting it. I was talking about the security against your, and that's true with when you're using GraphQL, for example. I've seen people just having like a whitelist of GraphQL queries that only you can make and only those are available, because GraphQL is expensive in terms of processing time. So you kind of can DDoS like a site just by doing GraphQL. So that's obviously, there are other security concerns, but you're not concerned about like the security issues that we've had in the past with Drupal, this latest Drupal 8 get-on. So that wouldn't affect you if you are using a decoupled architecture, right? For the other thing with JavaScript frameworks, that is true. So React is already working on a new version of, which is I think React Flex or something like that. However, what they are promising is that most of the changes will be internal, and the way in which you write it won't be affected that much. So I guess nobody really knows but that has happened with Angular, for example. So Angular is a great example of breaking that. If you were doing Angular 1, then you cannot just do Angular 2. You need to rewrite pretty much everything. So that's true, and that's something else to consider when you are moving to a decoupled approach. Mm-hmm. Yes?
If you're doing fully decoupled, why use Drupal at all? Why not just go against MySQL?
You can, yes. So why not? Why use Drupal when you go fully decoupled? So Drupal will still give you that editor experience, where if you are not using it, then you have to write your own. So that's something that Drupal will give you out of the box. The other thing is, if you go, I don't know if talking directly to MySQL, but what you can do, and what I've seen people do, is that they talk directly to Solr or Elasticsearch for searches, for example. So you don't have to go through Drupal to get that. So if you have a Solr instance, that would be exposed as a JSON or Elasticsearch, and you can just consume that for searches. So I guess it depends on the needs. As I said, Drupal still has a very solid data model. If you are not going to use Drupal, then you are responsible to build a very solid and scalable data model that won't be harder to maintain than a Drupal application. So I guess it's a balance, and it depends on what you're trying to build. But I think Drupal is still a very good solution for fully decoupled architectures, just because those two, and there's more stuff that you can take advantage of Drupal. So yes, it's a good choice. Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing fully decoupled, you'd still use the editor within Drupal?
You still use what?
You'd still use the editor within Drupal?
Yeah, because all of the entire admin interface is still there for you to use. So the only catch is that, for example, you won't have a preview, which is what I was talking before, because you have no way to know how your front end is going to render that content that you're entering. So that's something that you would have to write yourself if it's something that your client needs or your editors are going to need. But yes, you still have access to all that backend interface. And there are also talks about rewriting that admin interface for Drupal in React. So there's already a project going who's trying to decouple the admin side for Drupal. And I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but they're already working on it. Any other questions? All good. Well, thank you very much for coming.